This is I'm Stark, and in this video we will be looking at the 4 zones of Germany. So after the Yalta Conference and the Potsdam Conference, it was decided that Germany would be split up into 4 zones. These were the British zone, the Soviet zone, the French zone, and the US zone. So first of all, I will look at the British zone. And the British zone consisted of many of the industrial areas in which the strength of a German economy depended on. However, there was a population of 22.5 million people, and this meant that Britain were forced to spend large sums of money to feed the population. And after World War II, Britain simply did not have this money. So this meant that Britain became even more dependent on economic aid which came from the US. Other concerns of Britain were also about the influence that both France, but more importantly Soviets, desired because of this economic importance. And they worried that if Soviets were able to gain this influence of the region, it would significantly weaken Germany's economic recovery as the Soviets would demand further reparations, and this would potentially result in a shift towards support for the communists. So with this fear that Germany could become dominated by Soviet policies, Britain's military governor created a state of North Rhine-Westphalia on the 23rd of August 1946, and this was done by merging the Rhine province with Westphalia. Now, at the same time, Britain were also committed to the merging of both the British and the American zones, which was soon named by Zonia, which I'll talk about later. And these were attempts to strengthen West Germany to counter any Soviet attempts of domination. Now, France had the smallest of the zones, and they were particularly given it because they were one of the Allied nations. However, they didn't have one of the most important areas. And France, instead of these 4 zones, they wanted to divide up the whole of Germany and bring the Ruhr under control of 2 or more nations in which France had strong influence. Now, they also wanted many independent states, and this was all simply to increase the security of France, who had obviously been affected by the wars because of Germany, who had gone through France on both wars. Now, France were also a major factor in ensuring that the ACC could not function effectively. And the ACC is the Allied Control Council, but I'll talk about that a bit later in this video. So the USSR were willing to accept the foundation of 4 different political parties within the Soviet zone. And these were the Communists, who were called KPD, the German Social Democrats, the SPD, the Liberals, LDPD, and the Christian Democrats, CDU. However, essentially it was only the communist group who were dominant in this area, and they expected that the whole of Germany would eventually become communists. So in 1946, a new party called the Soviet Military Administration of Germany was introduced, despite the fact that there was much opposition from both Kurt Schumacher and the rest of East Germany. So this meant that the Soviet zone was being perceived as a place of repression by Western zones, and the Soviets were not able to achieve domination of politics within the Soviet area. So the Soviets then started to introduce many of very communist policies, such as land reform, which is lots of land being taken away from rich people and given away to poor people, nationalization of large industrial production, which is the fact that the Soviets took control of the main businesses in the Soviets, and compulsory tuition of the Russian language for German schools. So this meant that it was clear that people in the Soviet zone were being subjected under these Soviet policies. So finally, the US zone, and in the summer of 1945, George Kennan was clear that the US must give their section independence and economic security to avoid any potential threats from Eastern Europe. So the US were at first committed to this joint occupation, and this was the aim of the OMGUS, which stands for Office of Military Government, United States. And the OMGUS was set up by the US to manage the zones of the US in both West Germany and West Berlin. And these tasks specifically included denazification of Germany and the appointment of new officials from the German population. However, eventually in 1949 these were dismantled. But the person who had a large amount of influence was General Clay, who also had influence in things like the Marshall Plan, and he disagreed with the Soviet demand that the Ruhr should be placed under Allied control, the social and economic deprivation of the Germans in the US and British zones, and the Soviets' aim to create a centralized Germany, which was placing all the authority in the hands of a single political party. So instead, the US allowed free elections, and their national structure was based on federalism, which is where a central government makes laws for the whole country, while state governments make laws specific to one state, as it is currently in the United States of America. So, as I talked about a tiny bit before, there were the Allied Control Council, which was set up. And this was, even though the 4 zones were able to be administered differently, they were set up just to coordinate their actions. And this meant that the economic and political unity in Germany could be maintained. Now, all the ACC decisions did have to be unanimous, however, which meant that the states could be independent of each other. And the primary goal of the ACC was mainly just to reconstruct Germany in things such as denazification, reparations, and the prosecution of war criminals. But as we will learn later, the 4 zones doesn't necessarily work well, and eventually is split up into just the West and East Germany, which is what I will talk about in my next video. So thank you for watching, and see you soon. Bye.